I'm going to be talking about virtual reality, and we had a wonderful presentation on that yesterday, and I now understand a lot more about what we're sending people in to test and experiment with. But I'm going to be talking not about the apps, but about the people and what they are actually finding when they experience virtual reality for the first time, and how market researchers are using and have been using virtual reality to do their work. So are we on to the first slide? Right, okay, it's there and I have control, I think. Okay, now, as the guys pointed out yesterday, virtual reality is not new. And I don't think I've got control. You'll just have to look at that for ages. Okay, yes. Virtual reality isn't new, folks. It's been around for a very long time. Both artists and scientists have wanted to try and alter reality for us and give us something to look at that's a bit out of the ordinary. I think the earliest that I could find a reference going back to was these wonderful frescoes, which were created by Robert Barker, this one of the London skyline. It might not really look like what we think of as virtual reality today, but you have to imagine it floor to ceiling in a cylindrical room with the observer where the vanishing point is in the middle. And I think, relatively speaking to art of the day, it would have been a fairly immersive experience. In fact, what you relate to on this slide might depend on your age, but I think it's the Victorians took advantage of the stereoscopic effect of vision and parallax to give us slightly different images to create an impression of depth in 3 dimensions by looking at 2 slightly offset images. And I think I remember a kind of Fisher-Price version of something similar to that in the 80s that actually worked really similarly and just gave you images to swap in and out. In terms of the computer-generated virtual reality that we think of today, this really started, the term was coined in 1987 by Jaron Lanier, and it was in the 90s we saw a first wave of it, but it really wasn't accessible on a consumer level. I don't know if there's any real hardcore gamers in who remember the Nintendo Virtual Boy, this thing that looks a bit like a petrol lawnmower or something. It was a 32-bit attempt. It really wasn't a commercial success because the processing power versus the cost and what you needed to have to create any meaningful virtual reality, it certainly wasn't a consumer product at that time. But whilst it didn't break through in terms of a consumer product, market researchers have always liked virtual reality because the qualitative researchers that we also recruit participants for are very keen to take people out of their ordinary everyday lives and perceptions to get at the stuff going on in the less than conscious spheres of their brains. So virtual reality is a means of putting people into a false environment, an artificial environment, and finding out how they react to that without those inputs and attitudes of everyday life. Of course, it's one tool in a complex toolkit, and I really liked Angel's presentation yesterday talking about how we can blend the big data that we get from all sorts of different sources with that qualitative insight to put together a very rich picture of how people respond to new environments, whether they're real environments or virtual ones. It actually, nowadays, we can have neurometric data and proxemic data and all sorts of other big things which we can blend in with qualitative insight when we put somebody in a virtual reality environment. So it's really powerful and exciting. And virtual reality has another role in research, simply in demonstrating things to people. Very often when we're working for user experience researchers, but also for the qualies, we're talking about something that isn't real yet. We're asking participants to respond to an idea or a concept, and we can show them artists' impressions or wireframes or blueprints. And it's a challenge for us in recruitment to find people sometimes who can really respond effectively to that. They might be very imaginative or creative, but they can't make the leap from that to respond effectively and give you useful insight about the thing you're trying to make. At the other extreme, obviously you can have a mock-up or a prototype, but depending on the product category, that can be incredibly expensive and impractical to create. So sometimes virtual reality can sit at that sweet spot, and you can make a VR replica of something. And if you're researching cereal boxes, you can make a real prototype and say, well, it looks like this, and people can pick it up and turn it around and shake it or whatever. Not so much with a sports car. What virtual reality can do can give us something that people can examine from all sides, they can walk around and respond to. So I think researchers have been using it in that way for a long time. But a lot of our work recently has been about gaming. And I'm not a gamer, and I'll confess, I'm sure we have some people in this room who are, but I do know from a consumer point of view that the next few months are going to be very exciting because we're going to see a lot of buzz with different manufacturers competing for a share of what's pretty much a new consumer market. And it's one that spans a very wide range. We've got the sort of top of the range HC5, it's about 700 quid, and you need a really powerful computer to run it as well, through to Google Cardboard that you can put your phone in, things that depend on certain games, consoles, and everything in between. And every games title is also having to be redeveloped to go with this new technology. I really enjoyed the insight yesterday into how apps are being developed for virtual reality and the different thought processes that have to go into that. And the bit that you're looking at compared with the whole 360-degree view and the way the soundscape and everything has to be reimagined. So there's going to be a lot of new content coming out as well, and it's having to happen alongside. And also virtual reality is being combined with other kinds of altering reality, like augmented reality, arguably the biggest gaming success of the year. Well, arguably, definitely, was pure AR. But in the run-up to Christmas, I think we can start to see manufacturers talking more about hardware and why we should all be buying these headsets. And that's why we've been testing them a lot. Because the researchers and the manufacturers hiring them want to see VR gear join the kind of consumer electronics infrastructure of typical family homes. And they're vying for a share of a new market. It's not going to be a huge market in terms of the whole population, but it's an important one because it's where consumers have money. So Father Christmas is going to be delivering a lot of VR headsets this year, I think. I don't know if he'll be coming to our house yet with one, but we need to work out what consumers really want, what they're prepared to invest in, and what their different prerequisites are. You know, have they got computers in the living room? Have they got them in the bedrooms? Who's actually going to own this thing and who's going to choose it? As virtual reality headsets and gear and gaming start to take their place in the everyday homes and lives. Because it is creating a new consumer category. And we last saw this kind of scale of revolution in terms of gaming 10 years ago, in fact, when motion sensor, it was 10 years ago, if anybody's still feeling old, that the Wii Fit came out and then all the competitors there. So that changed gaming. And the interesting thing for us, we've been recruiting gamers for a long time, but this time we're not really recruiting gamers. And as I said, I'm not really a gamer. My husband's a gamer. He works in Saros as well, and he deals with user support, so he deals with a lot of really annoyed people who screen out of testing cool gear like this. So when he finishes work, he switches off one computer, then goes downstairs, switches on another, and shoots things for maybe half an hour before he can be civilized to the rest of us. And that works for him. But from this year, I think we're not really thinking in terms of people as gamers or non-gamers. There is this crossover into everyday family lives. This was the year that Super Better came out in paperback, and we learned about people curing PTSD and losing weight by playing Tetris and games. It's the year I watched my 95-year-old mother-in-law searching for Pokemons in the lounge of her sheltered accommodation, which was really the most surreal experience of my life because she thinks smartphones are sort of, she crosses herself whenever she sees something moving on the screen, and it was amazing. It's also the year I learned that it's not appropriate, apparently, to compare Candy Crush to yoga, but that's another story. But we're not looking for gamers anymore, we're looking for real people. And they might be early adopters, technology geeks, they might be parents, they might be grandparents, there might be people making decisions as much based on the aesthetics of their living room as they are on what the technology can do. They're coming at technology not from the point of view of everybody in this room, of how it works and why it's fascinating, but just what it can do and how it's going to fit into their lives. So when it comes to testing the games titles themselves, we have mainly been working with people who would call themselves gamers, or at least know that they play games, because we have to make sure that they're familiar with using the different consoles. But we've been testing with a range of people because we have to ensure there's cognitive fluency across every type of user, and people really can play it with their grandparents. So I'd love to have brought some of them with me today, these testers, but I brought them with me in video form. Now, these are all user-generated testimonies, so I need to apologize in advance for the quality of some of it, and for it actually looks like that video might be halfway through, so I wonder if I can just get it back to the beginning. Nope, didn't want to do that. Okay. Bear with me a sec, we'll get there. And hopefully the video will just run, and you'll be able to hear from some of the people who've been testing games for us this year. Wide range of people, different backgrounds and experiences. The one thing they had in common is that none of them have experienced virtual reality at all beforehand. There we go.
We were taken in, we were briefed, and very, very quickly we were at the consoles ready to play the game, which was based on a sports arena, first-person shoot-up type scenario, but in a virtual reality 3D environment. The environment itself was very, very strange. It's nothing I've ever experienced, as I said. After about 10 minutes, we were finished with the session and filled in a short questionnaire. And then, after being given our rewards, of course, we left.
It was a lot of fun. As you can imagine, it was a lot of fun being paid to play a video game. Although it was over very quickly, I was quite surprised at how quickly it went. The technology itself was very exciting to try out. It was something that I certainly haven't had much experience with, and it was cool to try out this new technology, which I think may well be quite important in the future of video games. So it was cool to feel like I was among some of the first people getting to try that out.
Basically, I had to play on a game with the headset on for about 10-15 minutes, I think it was. I actually really enjoyed it. I wasn't expecting to like it as much as I did. Not usually a massive gamer, but yeah, it was a pleasant surprise. I did enjoy myself.
And then the actual testing itself was it was actually a lot of fun, and it was definitely better than I expected, because what we did is a group of us lads, we went in and we put the headset on first, and we made ourselves comfortable, and the sort of reviewers, the interviewers tested the comfort as well. And then we had to play 3 games of this unreleased game, 3 rounds of this unreleased game, which was like a race and shoot 'em up, and it was superb. And each round that we finished, we would remove the headset, and then we'd fill in a questionnaire about how we made us feel. If it made us feel seasick, or if it made us a little bit ill, if we was experiencing any sort of dizziness or any kind of hiccups, anything like that.
It was initially daunting to be shutting up the real world, and although the headset was firmly strapped in place, I did position it so that there was space to keep sight of my close surroundings, such as the gaming controller. But I got immersed into the 3-dimensional world, which was scarily realistic in many ways. I was pleased the game testing did not last long, as I could imagine prolonged use could be quite addictive and also quite nauseating.
So yeah, I really enjoyed it. I found the actual experience of testing quite, I felt quite nauseous from it, and it made me feel pretty sick. But that was just, useful, I guess, for them as well, to see how different people reacted to the technology. But all in all, I thought it was a good incentive, and it's great to feel that you're, sort of in some way helping to develop the technology that they use. So yeah, it was a really great experience.
Research incredibly well organised. We had a full briefing beforehand by the member of staff there. There was a couple of questions, and then we had to sign a confidentiality agreement, just so we didn't go into tell people details about what we'd seen or experienced. So after all that, we got into playing with the equipment and the game. It was incredible, because I've never done anything with virtual reality before. The experience was amazing, and you get paid to test out equipment and a game which isn't in general release.
So testing a video game that I'd never played before, and a headset that was unreleased is sort of stuff of gamers and geekers' dreams, isn't it? Yeah.
Sorry again about the quality there. Find going through these videos that there's a sort of inverse relationship between the quality of what they're saying and how good the clips that they send in. So, but I hope you'll agree that there's a fascinating range of experiences reflected there. Obviously, huge enthusiasm from the hardcore gamers. They love it, and we're fighting them off when we're trying to get a range of different abilities into the testing. Others showed excitement mixed with some trepidation. Now, the whole idea of user testing is incredibly familiar to everyone in this room, but it's worth remembering that for participants who've had no involvement in what you do before, they only use finished products, the whole thing is a little bit unnerving and weird, especially when they think that Saros is all about focus groups and we're asking them to come in and take part in some kind of test, or what is that? So that kind of anxiety isn't unusual, and obviously it all gets allayed because you're all brilliant at your job and give them a brilliant experience. But scary new technology ramps up the tension a little bit as well, so we have to remember that. You can see more than one person there reported nausea and some degree of motion sickness, even though everybody that says that still say they want to do it again. They really enjoyed it, so I think it's just the sheer immersiveness does take some people by surprise initially. We've got more and fuller videos online if you're interested. We're adding to them all the time, but they are all user-generated wobbly webcams and so on. So in the future then, we've had a lot of predicting the future today, and it's always has some risk attached to it, but trying to think how research and virtual reality in the future are likely to impact and combine. As I say, we do a lot of recruitment for focus groups and kind of traditional market research, and there are already some companies using VR in very interesting ways, but it's very far from mainstream, and I would imagine that certainly within the next 5 to 10 years, it's going to be very, very normal sitting in a focus group talking about consumer products to say, right, now let's pop our headsets on and actually go and visit that resort or that showroom or whatever, have a look at those things directly, rather than just looking at here's some pictures of them, here's some artists' impressions. It's all going to change. So we'll go there, and as a result, researchers will get much richer feedback. I don't know if they'll even have to actually come into a research location at all to do that, I think. And it's interesting, many qualitative researchers and ethnographers we work with are still huge fans of face-to-face interaction. There are lots of great online qual platforms now, but people talk about nothing ever quite replacing that, the nuances you get of being in a room with somebody, being face-to-face, the non-verbal communication. And I would agree that certainly conducting an interview, a depth interview via Skype or something like that does have its limitations, but maybe one day when we can actually interview a hologram and we can perceive that non-verbal communication directly, then people will feel differently about that, I imagine, I would hope. It certainly might make our job very different if they don't have to actually travel anywhere, but there we go. It's part of a sort of bigger shift in society, I suppose, from ownership to actually subscription and involvement. But I think we'll be seeing a lot more 3D and VR content as well. At the moment, we frequently ask participants to do pre-work before research and to send us in photos and videos and things like that. I'm sure that in the future that's going to include 3D content, as well as all the headsets and things we've seen launched this year. Certainly at the trade shows, there were consumer-oriented 360-degree cameras starting to emerge. And whilst the price point is going to make them a very niche product for a while, we will see people starting to make their own VR content and sharing it and uploading it. So that's bound to become a part of research. And if we do actually have to get them to a research facility in future, then I'm sure we're going to be using all sorts of augmented reality tools and heads-up displays. Basically, there'll be no more excuses for lost or late participants. Mind you, a few years ago, I imagined we'd all be using Google Glass by now to direct participants and sending them their joining details. So that rather reflects some of the dangers inherent in trying to predict the future. Or I thought we'd all be doing focus groups in Second Life. There you go, things change. So thinking about planning research using VR and user tests or qualitative research, there's a few things that we've learned from the people we've been recruiting and from talking to the researchers actually carrying out the tests themselves. The first thing is that a lot of people are scared of virtual reality and they think they've got to make fabulous apps like the kick push one we learned about yesterday for The Economist. You don't have to do that for a quick test. People think about the design is going to be very expensive and difficult and you can't do it quickly. Whereas actually, if you focus very explicitly on the thing you're testing, like a specific customer service interaction, you can do the rest really quite basically and cheaply. Think Minecraft rather than Avatar, and just people will be so immersed in it, and the motion and the parallax will create the virtual reality. They won't be bothered about the backgrounds and whether it looks expensive or luxurious or real or not. So secondly is sit them down. We spoke to some people who've tried to do actual walking around virtual reality tests, and it's very complicated and fraught. Whereas actually the technology is so good now, when people are sitting down, they've got gaze-based control, they're using the game's controllers, that sensation of movement is very easy to create within the software. And then you don't have the risks of them tripping up as well as throwing up, and it makes the health and safety a lot more straightforward, basically. And a final thing is, if you're using virtual reality to test or study something that's completely unrelated to virtual reality, remember that for them it's new. And I know we did a show of hands yesterday, and most people here have experienced virtual reality. If you haven't, then I would urge you to seize your opportunity in the lunch break and go and see the exhibitors and have a go with it. But for all the people that we were talking to in those videos, it was the first time, and that will change as it becomes a more popular consumer tool. But for now, it's really important, if you want to talk to them about what they thought about that supermarket fixture, to just give them 5 minutes to say, wow, that was amazing, that was awesome first. And I've met some frustrated researchers who didn't build that decompression time into their discussion guide and didn't really get much feedback on what they wanted to hear about at all. So, recruiting participants, this is our side of it. This is what we do to bring people in to test virtual reality. And there's a number of things to think about here if you're planning to do this. The first is how you prime them, what you want them to think about in advance of coming in to talk to you, and let that dictate the approach. Now, because we're recruiting gamers, we're really shameless about how cool and sexy virtual reality is, and we massively exploit that and big that up to try and get them in and get them to refer their friends and tell everybody what a great time they've had. But I know people who are using it to test supermarket fixtures, and they actually avoid referring to virtual reality at all, because they don't want to attract hardcore game heads. They don't want to put off people who might be uncomfortable with those aspects of the terminology and the technology and don't want to really focus on that. They just talk about you'll have to take part in some 3D video immersive experience, but don't worry about that. It's really about cereal or whatever. So they bring them in on that basis. So it's worth thinking about what you want to prime people with. We know our audience well, so we give them what we think they want to hear. We actually had dozens of people signing up to test teleportation technology for us on April the 1st. They had no idea what they were signing up for, but they were all free and wanted to do it, so that was great. The health grounds is really important. You need to screen out on the predictable aspects, but certainly out of any given day's testing with about 30 people, we can expect one serious bout of nausea. We've had somebody actually unable to drive home from the test centre when she had to leave early. We've had people ringing up sort of the next day saying they had a killer migraine, which certainly they regard as being directly related to being in the testing. So it's a really tricky one. Obviously, these things are part of the features that the manufacturers are trying to address, but certainly in testing, I would say a good disclaimer, making it very clear what they're going to test and whose responsibility it is for their feelings and that they can stop at any time and so on, can protect everybody. And a final point on disclaimers. People get so excited about this stuff. They really want to talk about it, so you need to think hard about what they can talk about, and if it's an unreleased product or whatever, you need to be very sure that obviously we can address that in recruitment, we can pre-place your NDA, but it needs to be reinforced at the beginning and end of the testing as well. Tell everybody how cool this was, but don't mention the brand or whatever it is. That has to be kept under wraps until a particular release date. So I think when it comes to participants, those are the main issues, and they are going to be excited about it because it's new and because it is exciting. And as virtual reality becomes part of the consumer environment, just in the same way that motion controllers and eye tracking and things like that have done over the years, then we won't need to have all these special considerations when it comes to test participants. For now, assume nothing in terms of expectation, experience, or how they're going to react, and let's keep talking about it and asking questions. Thank you very much for listening, and any questions I can help with, please grab me now or in the break.
We have time for a question. Using your Terminator vision.
Hi, I'm Sally Kane from RNIB. I just wanted to ask about recruiting participants. I know this has been specifically about VR, but looking more broadly, do companies you work for specifically ask that you include people who are disabled if their product might be, specifically aimed for them as well, or do they ask you to exclude them? Obviously, I'm thinking more broadly about where design is going, where technology is going, and ensuring we've got inclusiveness as much as possible.
Absolutely. That's a very interesting question, and that's probably a whole other presentation. But to answer it very quickly, a lot of the consumer work we do, we make sure that we try and widen access as much as we can. However, there are sometimes limitations with venues and things like that, but we will check that out on an individual basis. If it's publicly funded, like a big citizens' jury or something like that, then yes, we will have a hard quota on all sorts of aspects of community segmentation. If it's technology, then it could well be that we have to specifically exclude people who might, for example, require screen readers and other adaptive technology because it simply hasn't been developed for whatever the innovative thing we're testing. So the answer is it depends, but as an organisation, we're certainly committed to diversity and widening access, and we try and crowbar that into the real world as much as we can, project by project.